Avery's boots crunched softly over the thick, leaf-laden forest floor. She'd been assigned to this planet only 6 months ago, and every day still brought something new. Odd creatures, unfamiliar plants, and unsettling sounds at night that never quite seemed to have a source. It was, after all, her job to explore, catalog, and understand this world's unique biology. She wasn't expecting today to be much different from the countless others she'd spent out here, but her usual circuitous route through the woods was interrupted by a sight that made her heart skip. A large trench was carved into the earth, ahead, stretching at least 50 meters long and peppered with shattered tree stumps. The ground bore the telltale char of a recent crash. Avery's curiosity quickly overcame her caution. She approached slowly, one hand on her field scanner, the other ready to grab her emergency flare gun if something dangerous lurked within. The far end of the trench sat the mangled remains of what could only be an escape pod. Its hull, once smooth and metallic, now looked battered and scorched. Bits of debris fanned out from the impact site, and a faint trail of acrid smoke still curled upward. Avery swept her scanner over the wreckage. No radiation spikes, no immediate danger. She exhaled and crept closer. What she found inside the pod surprised her even more than the crash itself. Tucked against one of the walls, behind a cluster of warped support beams, was a creature she'd never seen before. It was small, barely, the size of a house cat, and its dark, glistening scales caught the weak sunlight filtering through the trees. 4 brilliant eyes, set in a diamond pattern, blinked at her sluggishly. Long, delicate claws twitched as the creature let out a faint, trilling whimper. It was injured. That much was clear. A nasty gash ran along its side, and one of its hind legs was twisted at an awkward angle. But despite the obvious pain it must have been in, it didn't snarl or lunge. Instead, it gazed up at her with a look that could only be described as pleading. Avery knelt beside the pod's entry and extended her scanner closer, muttering under her breath. "You're not from around here, are you?" she said. The scanner displayed gibberish. No known species match, no recognizable life signs. Whatever this thing was, it was as alien as they came. She took a deep breath, weighing her options. Standard protocol dictated reporting such finds immediately, but something about this creature tugged at her. Leaving it here in the wreckage, alone and in pain, seemed unthinkable. She fished a sterile field kit from her pack and carefully reached out. The creature flinched at first, but when her gloved hand rested gently near its side, it relaxed, letting out a low, vibrating hum that reminded her of a purr. She smiled, despite herself. "All right, little one," she whispered. "Let's get you out of here." It took some effort, but Avery managed to free the creature from the wreckage without causing further harm. She wrapped it in a thermal blanket and placed it inside her sample container, leaving just enough space for it to breathe freely. As she carried it back toward her research outpost, the creature settled against the soft fabric, blinking up at her with a faint, grateful trill. It was so small, so strange, and so unlike anything she'd ever encountered. Avery didn't know what she had just found, but she knew one thing. She couldn't let it die out here in the woods. Back at her research outpost, Avery's focus shifted entirely to the strange creature she had rescued. Her modest lab, filled with diagnostic equipment and environmental controls for studying the planet's fauna, now had a new centerpiece. She carefully transferred the cub from the thermal blanket to a soft makeshift bed of insulating gel in an observation enclosure. The creature's 4 iridescent eyes darted around its new surroundings, alert but unthreatening. Avery kept her movements slow and deliberate, speaking softly even though she knew the alien couldn't understand her words. "You're going to be okay. I just need to figure out what you need." Step 1 was stabilizing the cub's health. Its injuries were substantial, a deep cut along its flank and a broken hind leg. Standard first aid supplies weren't designed for alien physiology, So Avery improvised, using hypoallergenic medical foam to seal the wound and a padded splint to stabilize the leg. The creature flinched at first but soon allowed her to work, emitting a low, almost musical hum. Avery noted that it seemed to vocalize more often when she was near, as though it found comfort in her presence. The next challenge was food. Scanning. Its tissue revealed that it metabolized protein in a way similar to terrestrial animals, but required trace elements that weren't common in the local ecosystem. Avery set up a nutritional drip for the first 2 days, scouring her supplies for anything that might approximate the alien's diet. On the 3rd day, the creature refused the drip, instead using its tiny talons to prod at a sealed container of powdered protein supplements. Avery watched in fascination as the cub managed to open the container, spilling some powder onto the floor. Before she could stop it, the creature extended a long, delicate tongue and lapped up the spilled powder. "Well," Avery muttered, "I guess that answers that." From then on, she prepared a paste of protein supplement, water, and micronutrient powders. The creature eagerly ate from a shallow dish, and Avery found herself smiling at its increasingly robust appetite. Over the following weeks, the cub, whom she started calling Echo, began showing signs of recovery. The broken leg mended faster than Avery expected, and the gash on its side healed into a smooth line of shimmering scales. Echo's movements grew more agile each day. It no longer stayed curled up in one corner of the enclosure, but explored every inch of its new home. Avery provided safe objects for it to interact with: soft rubber balls, pieces of rope, even an old data pad. Echo examined each item with careful intent, turning them over in its talons and tapping them against the enclosure walls as if trying to understand their purpose. It wasn't just Echo's physical recovery that fascinated Avery. She began to notice distinct patterns in the creature's behavior. For example, when Avery entered the lab, Echo's scales would shift in color, sometimes turning a pale silver when she approached, other times a warm gold when she sat nearby and spoke softly. Its hums varied in tone and rhythm, and Avery began to wonder if they were more than just animalistic sounds. Could they be a rudimentary form of language? Curiosity drove Avery to experiment. She repeated certain sounds and gestures, watching Echo's reactions. When she tapped the enclosure twice, Echo would tap back. When she tilted her head, Echo often mimicked the movement. Over time, these simple exchanges became more complex. If Avery repeated a sequence of tones, Echo would try to match them. If she pointed at an object, Echo would eventually nudge it or move it with its claws. It wasn't exactly conversation, but it was close enough to astonish Avery. The bond between them deepened. Whenever Avery left the lab, Echo would wait by the side of the enclosure closest to the door, greeting her with a soft trill upon her return. Sometimes after long hours of work, Avery would sit beside the enclosure and watch Echo play or rest. She found herself talking to the creature as though it were a companion rather than a research subject. Echo would respond with shifts in color, gentle hums, and a gaze that felt understanding. Avery knew she was breaking every protocol in the book. She wasn't supposed to develop emotional attachments to her specimens, much less attempt to communicate with them. But Echo wasn't just a specimen. It was intelligent, responsive, and somehow deeply connected to her. The data she collected proved it. Echo's neural patterns showed a complexity far beyond what she'd seen in any animal, and its behavioral responses were unmistakably intentional. At night, as she reviewed her notes, Avery found herself reflecting on the strange turn her life had taken. She had come to this planet expecting to catalog ordinary flora and fauna. Instead, she was building a relationship, an understanding, with an alien life form. And while she didn't know what the future would hold, she knew one thing for certain. Echo was more than just a foundling, it was something truly extraordinary. Avery's outpost had become a sanctuary for Echo, a safe haven where the little creature continued to thrive. Over the months its personality flourished, but so too did Avery's questions. She couldn't shake the sense that Echo was far more than a simple animal. And the data she was collecting hinted at something much bigger than she'd initially imagined. It started with the faint signals. While running routine scans of Echo's physiology, Avery noticed a subtle, consistent emission of electromagnetic pulses from within its body. At first she assumed they were some kind of bioelectric field, a natural phenomenon she hadn't yet documented. But as she began to analyze the data, she realized the emissions weren't random at all. They were patterned, organized. They resembled the kind of encoded bursts used in communications technology, not biological processes. She ran the numbers again and again, cross-referencing every known species in her database. No match, no explanations. Just these steady, almost rhythmic signals that suggested purpose. Avery's heart raced at the implications. Echo wasn't just a lost predator. It was transmitting. With cautious determination, Avery began decoding the signals. She had to modify her equipment and write new algorithms. But slowly, a clearer picture emerged. The pulses contained layers of data, an intricate weave of audio, visual, and what seemed to be navigational coordinates. Much of it was still fragmented, but one thing became abundantly clear. Echo's body was broadcasting a distress signal, and the more she parsed it, the more certain she became that this signal was calling for help. But who or what would answer? Her breakthrough came when she linked the signal's signature back to the escape pod's damaged systems. Digging into the pod's memory core, she uncovered stored transmissions, blurred and partial but undeniably sophisticated. The recordings showed flashes of what appeared to be an alien vessel's interior, and in one of the clearer fragments, she saw a tall, regal figure, the Empress. Avery froze the frame and stared. The Empress, at least that's how she began to think of this figure, was unlike any creature Avery had ever seen. Draped in ornate, almost organic-looking armor, the being's elongated face radiated intelligence and authority. Its hands, delicate yet powerful, rested on a sleek, black-scaled creature that looked like a larger version of Echo. The Empress's gesture was unmistakably affectionate. She stroked the creature's head in a way that spoke volumes. This was no common beast. It was cherished. It didn't take long for Avery to connect the dots. Echo was not a wild predator. It was not an orphan. It was a lost member of a species that held it in the highest regard. Perhaps it was a guardian animal, a companion, or even a kind of ambassador species. Whatever the case, it was clear that the Empress valued it deeply. And if the Empress valued it, so too would others. Avery's sense of awe was tempered by worry. If the Empress was searching for Echo, others might be as well. Others who might not have the same intentions. Could she trust that the first visitors to follow the signal would be friendly? And what would happen if they discovered her involvement? She hadn't just studied Echo, she'd formed a bond. She'd cared for it, taught it, and in some ways, changed it. Would that be seen as interference? As contamination? She shut down the feed and leaned back, her mind racing. Echo had come to her as a fragile, injured creature, but it was more than that now. It was a link to a much larger story, a story that was only just beginning to unfold. Avery didn't know what the Empress would make of her, a simple xenobiologist on a remote colony world. But she hoped that when the day came to meet her, the Empress would understand. And so, while Echo played with a rubber ball in the corner of the lab, Avery began drafting her first message. If Echo's signal was meant to reach the Empress, then she would ensure it carried a clear message. Echo was alive, cared for. Echo had doubled in size. Its once delicate frame now carried the power of a formidable predator, sleek muscles rippling under its shimmering scale-like hide. Avery watched, both impressed and uneasy, as it leapt effortlessly onto a high shelf in the enclosure, its claws clicking against the reinforced steel. What had once been a fragile creature now exuded strength and agility that no terrestrial animal could match. But along with Echo's growth came new challenges. Its ultrasonic bursts, once faint, almost imperceptible, had grown stronger, powerful enough to disrupt sensitive equipment in Avery's lab. A sharp trill from Echo could knock out her data terminals for several seconds, and while it never showed aggression toward Avery, its claws, sharper than scalpels, tore through the safety mesh during one of its climbing exercises. Avery had to fortify the enclosure, reinforcing the walls with a dense alloy and installing dampeners to manage the increasingly disruptive sound waves. Despite these measures, word of Echo's presence began to spread. The incident at the neighboring research station was the turning point. A team of botanists on a routine survey had detected the unusual signals from Echo's escape pod and, out of curiosity, pinged their corporate overseers. The corporation, sprawling conglomerate known for exploiting unique alien resources, quickly took an interest. Their analysts flagged Echo as an exceptional asset, a phrase Avery knew to be a euphemism for something far more ominous. Avery received the first official request 2 days later. A corporate representative, bland and efficient, demanded that she transfer the specimen to a secure facility for further study. When she refused, they escalated. Over the following weeks, she faced a barrage of messages, each more threatening than the last. The company cited safety protocols, corporate property laws, and a dozen other pretexts. They even tried appealing to her scientific curiosity, promising state-of-the-art facilities where Echo's potential could be fully realized. Avery held firm. She knew that once Echo was out of her care, it would be treated as an object, a means to some lucrative end. They wouldn't see the intelligence behind those 4 bright eyes or understand the bond they had built. Echo would become a weapon, or a prize, or a curiosity locked behind glass, and Avery couldn't let that happen. The breaking point came on a cold, misty morning. A low mechanical hum reached her ears before she saw the aircraft. Looking out her lab's viewport, she spotted 2 heavily armed transport drones descending through the trees. They hovered above the clearing, their searchlights illuminating the ground. Avery's stomach sank as she realized what was happening. They weren't here to talk. They were here to take. Echo felt it too. The creature's scales darkened, a deep blue-black that Avery had learned meant stress. It retreated to a corner of its enclosure, growling softly. Avery moved quickly. Her mind racing. She triggered the lab's automated defenses, basic deterrent measures meant to protect against wildlife, and donned a reinforced jacket. She would have to think fast if she wanted to keep Echo safe. The mercenaries arrived not long after. A.K. Team of 5 clad in dark armor approached the lab with calculated precision. Avery met them at the airlock, trying to stall them with pleas and technical jargon. This creature is highly intelligent. It's not a simple specimen. Removing it from this environment could endanger both its health and your team's safety. The leader of the group, a tall man with a neutral, unreadable expression, simply raised a hand, signaling his team forward. "We're not here to negotiate," he said flatly. "Stand aside." The confrontation that followed was short and chaotic. Echo, sensing danger, unleashed a piercing ultrasonic cry that sent the mercenaries reeling. Avery used the momentary confusion to lock the inner doors, trapping the intruders in the entryway. She activated the lab's emergency protocols, flooding the airlock with a thick, harmless fog to obscure their vision. By the time they managed to breach the inner door, Echo was ready. With a blur of motion, it darted past Avery and confronted the mercenaries head-on. Despite its small size, Echo moved with terrifying precision. It disarmed one man by slicing through the strap of his weapon with a single swipe, then used its ultrasonic bursts to disable their communications. It didn't harm them beyond what was necessary, Avery noticed. Echo was powerful, but it showed restraint. It knocked the mercenaries off balance, destroyed their equipment, and ensured they couldn't continue the operation. Within minutes, the team was retreating back to their dropships, battered and humiliated. When the transports finally lifted off, Avery collapsed into a chair, shaking with adrenaline. Echo returned to her side, its scales now a soft, calming silver. It nudged her hand with its snout, letting out a quiet, reassuring hum. Despite the danger, it hadn't fled. It had stayed to protect her. As she sat there catching her breath, Avery realized that the room was dim except for the glow of Avery's screens. Readouts, projections, and signal patterns filled every monitor. Her lab's usual quiet hum was broken only by the soft clicking of keys and the occasional curious trill from Echo as it perched nearby. Months of analysis and experimentation had culminated in this moment. She had finally refined the escape pod's damaged distress beacon into a clear, amplified signal that she was certain would be heard. Avery glanced over at Echo. The creature watched her intently, as if sensing the significance of what was happening. Its scales pulsed in rhythmic bands of silver and violet, colors she'd learned to associate with anticipation. She gave it a small smile. "If this works," she said softly, "you'll finally get to go home." Echo chirped and tilted its head as though encouraging her to continue. Taking a steadying breath, Avery tapped the final sequence of commands. The beacon's output surged. A focused pulse of data shot into the void, carrying everything she had managed to decode. Echo's biosignature, the coordinates she had painstakingly reconstructed, and a message crafted in simple, universal tones. It was a call, clear, direct, and impossible to miss for anyone still searching. And now all they could do was wait. Days passed. Avery tried to keep herself busy, but her nerves were on edge. She went about her usual tasks, cataloging local flora, maintaining her equipment, but her mind always returned to the beacon. What if the signal wasn't strong enough? What if no one was listening? Or worse, what if the wrong people answered? Her fears began to fade one crisp morning when her long-range scanner lit up with a contact. At first she thought it was a glitch. The object was massive, larger than any known human vessel, and it had appeared seemingly out of nowhere. She ran the data again, her heart pounding. There was no mistake. Something was here, and it wasn't from Earth. She stood at the viewport, staring as the ship emerged from the atmosphere. It was unlike anything she had imagined, its surface shifting like liquid metal, reflecting the hues of the planet below. The craft hovered silently above the forest, casting a shadow over her. Tiny outpost. Avery barely had time to grab her jacket before a smaller vessel detached from the larger ship and descended toward the clearing. Echo stood at her side, its colors flickering with excitement. Avery couldn't help but smile despite her anxiety. "Looks like you've got visitors," she murmured. The smaller craft landed with an elegant precision. From it emerged a group of tall, graceful figures. Their forms were clad in flowing, ornate armor that shimmered like living water. They moved with an almost hypnotic poise, their every gesture deliberate and controlled. Avery recognized one of them immediately. The figure from the recordings. The Empress. The Empress's gaze fell upon Echo and her composure broke. In an instant the regal figure became something else entirely. A parent, a friend, a soul reunited with something precious. She dropped to one knee and extended her arms. Echo bolted toward her, leaping into her embrace. Avery watched, awestruck, as the alien ruler cradled the creature. The two exchanged soft, musical sounds that made the air around them seem to hum. With warmth, Avery's hand hovered over her chest as she fought back tears. For all her scientific objectivity, she couldn't deny the beauty of the moment. Echo, who had arrived at her lab broken and lost, was finally home. The Empress rose, Echo perched on her shoulder, and approached Avery. Though they spoke no common language, the Empress placed a hand over her heart and then reached out, a gesture of gratitude so profound that no words were needed. Avery responded in kind, bowing her head slightly. She didn't need to ask if the Empress understood how much she had cared for Echo. The Empress's eyes said everything. "Thank you, I know." Before departing, one of the Empress's attendants presented Avery with a small device. She wasn't entirely sure what it was. A knowledge repository, perhaps, or a means of communication. But she accepted it with a respectful nod. As the delegation returned to their ship, Avery stood watching until the craft disappeared into the sky. The silence that followed felt different. The lab, the forest, the planet. Everything felt a little emptier without Echo's presence. But it wasn't a sad emptiness. It was the quiet satisfaction of knowing that Echo had returned to where it belonged. Avery returned to her work. But nothing was quite the same. Her days were still filled with discovery, with cataloging the endless wonders of the planet. But she carried a new sense of purpose. She had connected, if only briefly, with something far beyond her world. And she knew that out there, in the vast reaches of the galaxy, was a bond that would never be forgotten.